Right guys, well, since I finished my electric scooter a few weeks ago, I've not been in my garage. I've not been making any projects or anything. So yesterday I thought I'm going to start tidying my garage, ready for making something in the new year. And while I was tidying up, I found this piece of wood. Now this piece of wood's a little bit special. I know it's only pine, but on this side it's got a Spitfire drawn on it. I drew this before I had my YouTube channel, and I thought this wood, I thought it had been thrown on the fire or thrown out or something, I don't know. Anyway, because I found it, I thought to myself, I'm going to finish what I was going to do in the first place, and that was a Mark 9 Spitfire, carved, all 3D, and stuck to a board so I can hang my keys on the bottom of it. Something like this. Something similar to that, only obviously that's a car. No, that's a bit stupid, you know that. So now that I've found it, I've decided I'm going to carry on with what I was going to do in the first place and make myself a Spitfire 3D hanger board. Let's get making. Well guys, you can't watch me draw it because it's already drawn. So instead, you can watch me cut it out and start sanding it to shape. Well, now that I've cut the basic shape out, you might be wondering why I've cut the intakes off the bottom and the radiator and the aerial and the rear wheel. And that's because I'm going to make those pieces separate and glue them on afterwards. So now what I've got to do is file this down to the exact shape before I start giving it any detail. So let's get on with that. Now I can't get these top bits on my circular sander, so I'm just going to use a couple of files and get it to the right shape. It doesn't have to be perfect because later on I'll put more details on and then I'll get the final perfect shape. The fuselage tapers down from the cockpit to the rudder, and the rudder is going to be about that thick. And this is going to come up from here. So I've got to cut or grind off. I've got to remove a lot of material there. Now when I remove that material, all the drawing I've done on the front's going to disappear. So what I've got to do is I've got to mark where the elevator is going to go. Now the elevator is going to start there and finish there. So I'll mark it across the bottom, mark it across here, and the height is going to be here. So now when I take away all this material, I'll be able to look underneath, see my marks, see the height, and I'll be able to draw this. I'll be able to draw it back on so I know the position of it. Now I've also got to mark the position, the top of the rudder. It's going to be here. And the bottom of the rudder, well, that lines up with this mark, so that's quite handy. So now what I've got to do is I've got to remove all this material. I'm going to shape this up a little bit first, because once I start removing all the wood off the surface, I remove the pencil lines and then I've lost the shape. So I better do that now before I do anything else. Let's get on with it. So now I'm just going to redraw these lines. I can still see them, but I'll just make them a bit more clear. Because I've got the shape of the tail now, I'm quite happy with that. So let's get cutting that off. Okay, starting to take shape now. Now I have to do the same on the front. To get the exact shape and size of the front of the aircraft, I've had an idea. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the spinner off. I've measured it at 12mm, so I'm going to get a piece of 12mm dowel and I'm going to shape the spinner. I'm going to cut it in half and stick it back on, and that way I'll have the exact size and shape of the front of the aircraft. Should be perfect. Let's give it a go. So now that the shape's not too bad, I just have to cut it off and cut it in half. So there it is. Now all I have to do is cut it in half and sand it smooth. And now, by putting the spinner onto the front, I can see exactly the shape that I need to carve it to. Let's just mark it out. And there we go. Well, there's the width of the spinner. So now I have to cut that off. I've just got this piece and put it against here so it's flat again, and I can grip it in the vise now. And now I've done that, I can cut this piece off. And I keep this piece for reference. I think it's starting to look like a Spitfire now, a little bit. And I think that's enough for today. I'm going having a beer because it's beer o'clock. Right, well, it's the day after and it gets a bit tricky now because I've got to start removing some material. But before I remove the material, I'm going to have to draw some of the details on to make sure I don't remove too much material. And to help me to do that, I've got myself this book, and in it there's loads of pictures, so that should help me. Hopefully I'll get it right. So let's get things marked out and let's get on with it. first thing I'm going to try and make today is the exhaust that fits in here. And the Spitfires were fitted with a Merlin engine, and it was a V12. And like you can see in this photograph here, they've got 6 exhausts on each side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the exhaust out of this piece of wood. Now before I fit these, I'm going to paint them, and I'm also going to paint the recess that they fit into, because it will be very difficult to paint afterwards. The next bit I've got to make is the hardest bit of all, and that's the wing. And the reason it's hard is because when I put this onto a board, I can't make the wing full length. Otherwise it'll just stick out too far and it'll look ridiculous. So what I've got to try and do is I've got to condense the length of the wing into about 1/4 of its size, but I've still got to keep the shape. So I'm going to make it out of this piece, cut the shape, angle it, and then stick it onto the piece of wood. But that's going to take me a long time, too long to film. So if you can just hang on another minute, you'll be able to see what it looks like when I've finished. So the last thing I'm doing today is I'm painting these exhausts and the hole in the panel where the exhaust fits. And then that's it for today. Now that I've got the bottom bit blended in, the last thing I have to do is the stabiliser stroke elevator and the rudder. Now before I do the next bit, I've got something really amazing to tell you. Right? I didn't believe this when I first found out, but the rudder on this aircraft only weighed, the entire rudder, right, on this aircraft only weighed 8 kilograms. That's 8 bags of sugar for the entire rudder. 8 kilograms, that's 18 pounds. This aircraft could fly at over 400 miles an hour, and yet it only weighed 8 kilograms. I'm amazed at that. The reason for that is because the structure was aluminium, but the surface was all covered in fabric. And it used to be women at Castle Bromwich that did all this fabric covering. So well done, women. I think you did a fantastic job. I love Spitfires, and what you did there, that was amazing. So what I've got to do now to represent this fabric covering, I've got to put little grooves in here, because if you look at all the photographs you can always see little lines in there. It never happened on the body because it was aluminium covered, but here, well, let's get on with these lines and I'll show you what I mean. And there we go. I think that's not such a bad representation. So that's okay, I'm happy with that. Last thing I'm going to do today is cut out the stabiliser and elevator. And I think I've got a good representation of the shape. So I'm going to make some indents here. and then I'm going to give it the shape, and I'm going to keep reapplying the indents so I don't lose them when I cut the shape. I know what I mean, you probably don't, but just watch and you'll see what happens. Well, I've got about an hour before my missus gets back, so what I'm going to try and do is make all the little details just to finish this plane off. Let's get on with it. Well guys, there's my interpretation of a Mark 9 Spitfire. Got the radiator under the wing, the air intake, the two cannons, the spinner, the engine exhausts, and I believe this is an air compressor intake. Got the cockpit with the metal frame, the aerial, the tiny little light on the rudder, and the rear wheel. And I've tried to put a few panel lines in. So all I have to do now is paint it and then mount it onto the board. And I'm going to be doing that over the next few days. So if you don't want to miss it, do me a favour, subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching guys, catch you next time. Video of me drawing it because it's already drawn. So guys, you can't watch a video of me drawing it because it's already drawn. Well guys, you can't watch me cutting. Yeah, you can.